My name is Jack Fitzgerald. I'm the co-founder of the Warren Bennis Leadership Experience at the University of Cincinnati. On this episode of Bennis Stories, I interview Bruce Jackson. Jackson is the SUNY Distinguished Professor and James Agee Professor of American Culture at the University of Buffalo. Jackson is an American folklorist, documentary filmmaker, writer, and photographer. Jackson has edited or authored more than 30 books and has also, in collaboration with SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor Diane Christian, directed and produced 5 documentary films. For 16 years, he and Christian have presented the popular Buffalo Film Seminars, a film series open to UB students and the general public. Jackson has been the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, was nominated for a Grammy Award, named an associate member of the Folklore Fellows by the Finnish Academy of Science and Letters, and recognized by the French government in 2002, and in 2012, the President of France appointed him into the National Order of Merit. His photographs focus mainly on prison life. A photo collection from the Cummins Unit in Arkansas was exhibited at the Albright Knox Art Gallery at the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University. Other recent exhibitions are Being There, Portraits from a Prison, American Gulag, Bridging Buffalo, and Mirrors.
Well, my connection with Cincinnati predates Warren, actually. I was a graduate student in Indiana.
Okay.
In comparative literature. And got to my third year, started applied for jobs. And one job offer I got was University of Cincinnati.
Oh, wow.
4 classes. I mean, in the English department, it would have been just hell. I got, before I signed the contract, and then I got what's called a Harvard Junior Fellowship. I was a junior fellow in the organization called the Society of Fellows, which is it's like a young man's MacArthur. It was only men then. It's men and women now. And for 3 years, they give you a decent salary, support your research, no reports, no questions, no applications. The only requirement is when you're in town, you come to this absolutely posh dinner on Monday nights. I mean, 3 fork, 3 wine glass kind of dinner. And on Tuesday and Friday, you go to lunch with the other junior fellows. And there were 24 of us. There were 8 picked a year. And I got a 4th year. So I wrote Cincinnati, and I said, I want to get out of the contract. And I got a junior fellowship. And in Cincinnati, the chair of the English department wrote me back very pissed off and said, "You're taking a junior fellowship rather than an assistant professorship here." I sent him what a junior fellowship was. He said, "Oh, never mind." So in my 4th year at Harvard, I was teaching a class in social relations with a psychiatrist named Norman Zinberg. And Norman was a friend of Warren's. And when Norman heard I'd taken a job at Buffalo, he said, "There's somebody you got to meet. I got a friend who's going to Buffalo as provost of social relations." So I said, "Okay," and so I got a call from Warren, and he says, "Why don't you come to my house in Boston for brunch?" And that would have been in May of 1967. And that's when Warren and I met.
Wow. At that brunch.
At that brunch. And something significant happened at that brunch, which figures in our later relationship. Warren and Cleary were there, and so was a lawyer poet named Saul Tauster, Tauster. And he was a lawyer to Martin Meyerson, who was then president of UB, of Buffalo. Mm-hmm. During the brunch, Saul gets a phone call telling him that literary critic Leslie Fiedler has been arrested on marijuana possession charges. Mm-hmm. Leslie at that time was one of the best known literary critics in the United States. Is one of the reasons I went to Buffalo. There was a group of people here. It was just it was just an incredible gang of people. It was a great place to be.
Mm.
And so they had a big discussion about it, about how to handle it. And as I recall, Martin wanted to suspend Leslie while it was worked out. He panicked. Saul said, I don't think that's a good idea. The whole English department said, if you suspend Leslie, we're all walking out, the way professors do. And nobody did anything. Leslie was convicted, and eventually it was thrown out. It was a total bullshit case. It was a setup. They had literally there's a local narcotics captain named Mike Amico, who made his rep by busting college students and college profs. It's what he lived for. I mean, he would arrest kids for seeds found in the floor mat and wouldn't care if they got thrown out. And he ran for sheriff, got elected on it. And some kids in Leslie's house had some dope. Leslie had gotten arrested on a charge of maintaining premises on which narcotic drugs are used. Which is something the mother of any junkie could be arrested for, but none ever had. So it was that kind of smarmy case. So,
did you notice from the start that Warren kept interesting company? I mean, it seemed from everyone that I talked to, he was always inviting people from all different disciplines into his circle, and
that's where I'm going. Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we had a big discussion about this. And then I didn't see Warren again until I got to Buffalo in September. Immediately, Warren invited me to join a group that met at his house once a month. And I don't remember how many it was. Maybe there were a dozen of us. And they ranged from freshly minted assistant professors like me to full professors of great fame. And I mean, it was a very various group from all over the campus. Mm. And I don't remember if we had topics or if we just started talking about something of interest and just did it for 3 hours and ate and drank and then went home. And some of the people who became most important to me in my early years here, I met through that group. One of the things Warren was always fabulous about was putting people in contact with other people. I mean, he loved doing that, and he had a good sense of who fit and who didn't. So he did that. And I'll give you another example. Excuse me.
Yeah.
He got hold of a print of Alan Rene's film Night and Fog, which is a film. Do you know the film?
No.
It's maybe a 34 minute documentary made of captured Nazi footage from the concentration camps, and all in black and white, and some color film shot in the present in the same places. So you see the camps now totally desolate, grass growing over where the barracks were, where the gas chamber was. You see the smokestack is still, the Arbeit macht frei sign is still there. And but the main body of it is this footage, and it was like home movies. Like some guy had a movie camera and he took pictures of the Jews being taken off the train and things. And it was the first time people here really saw that stuff, because none of that footage had yet gotten out when the film came out in the 50s. And people knew about the camps but hadn't seen this phase of it. So Warren gets a print of it. And he invites maybe 15 people to his house. Maybe 20, 15, 20. Many could fit in that living room. And he shows it. And afterwards, there's some discussion. And it goes on for a while. And it's the kind of thing that, what do you say? I mean,
Right.
almost whatever you say is inadequate. So we're talking, and one woman said, but how many Germans really knew about this? There was one guy in the group. It's the first time I met him, I think. His name was Conrad von Moltke. Conrad was about 6'6", huge guy.
Mm-hmm.
Conrad said, he was German, obviously. I don't know, he was a historian, I think. And he said, we all knew, in this deep voice. Now, Conrad's father was Field Marshal Conrad von Moltke, who had been executed by Hitler, hanged by Hitler in early 1945 for opposing Hitler. His father, yeah, in 45. So when somebody like Conrad says something like that, it carries a lot more weight than, say, some historians say, oh, they all knew. And that produced a very different kind of conversation. So things like that happened at Warren's house frequently. Warren came to Buffalo as what was called Provost of Social Sciences in Administration. The university, I think the faculty senated this before Meyerson came. It broke the faculty up into 7 components, each of them having a provost as head. Social Sciences Administration, Arts and Letters, Engineering, Library Sciences, Health Sciences. I don't remember what the other 2 were. But basically, the provosts were what we call a dean. Mm-hmm. So it was a silly title.
Okay.
And Martin.
So you would consider Warren's role then? In today's language, he would be a dean.
He would have been a dean of social sciences. And some of the assignments of departments to those were absurd because they didn't have enough departments for social sciences, so they put philosophy in it. I mean, philosophy should have been in arts and letters, and so it was a cockamamie thing that was reconstructed about 20 years later. Mm-hmm. But then, within a year, not much more, Martin made Warren vice president for, I think it was education.
Okay.
For classes. And then he made
Martin's the president. Martin Meyerson. This is
I'm sorry. Yeah, Martin Meyerson.
Meyerson. Did he kind of convince Warren to come to Buffalo? Was that right?
Yeah.
He talked with him.
Well, you talked, and that's a story I'm going to get to.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you want all this.
Oh no, it's good. Yeah, this is good.
But then Martin appoints Warren administrative vice president. Now, I may not have the title of these quite right, but that's what it was. Now, the job of being administrative vice president and education vice president combined is what we now call a provost. I mean, that's what a provost is. The president of a modern university really is the face of the university. He's the one who negotiates with the legislature or with the head of the system for budget. He's the one who talks to the press about whatever people need to be talked to the press about. But it's the provost who really runs the joint. So Warren had that job. So when Warren was a provost, he was a dean. And then later he was a provost, but the title didn't exist yet. So he was probably the first real provost that I know of in an American university.
No kidding.
And we were very close friends. I mean, we'd hang out a lot. I spent more time at his house than mine.
What was your role at that time? You finished the Harvard program and then...
I was an assistant professor here. I got promoted to associate professor the next year and full professor 2 years after that.
Okay. And of American culture? Was that?
I was in the English department and comparative literature. But I came here under when I left Harvard, I had 4 job offers. It was a very different academic marketplace than now. I mean, there were jobs everywhere, and 3 of them were to teach folklore. It was at Penn, UCLA, or at MIT. I was going to be in the English department. They offered me a job. Buffalo said I could teach whatever I wanted, in whatever department I wanted to, as long as they wanted me. And I knew I wasn't going to be doing one thing in my career. So that's one of the reasons I came to Buffalo. And since I've been here, I've taught in the law school, the architecture school, the art department, media studies department, library school, sociology department, English complete, and a couple others. So it's one of the things that drew me here. It had that kind of flexibility that's so rare in universities now.
Very interdisciplinary.
Yeah. So, but also I was a very good fit for Warren because so was he. I mean, Warren, his interests were all over the place. And
yeah, could you say more about that? Like, how did you observe that in him?
I observed it simply. I was saying we hung around. I had 2 young children at the time in a small house. He had 2 young children in a very large house. So we spent a lot more time at his house than at mine. And he'd also have large groups of people. One time, I forget how many, a bunch of Buffalo profs got arrested for a sit-in at the university president's office. And Warren had a benefit picnic for them at his house. He would just have things at his house. He used social events functionally. But for some reason, he and I got to be close, and he would ask me to help him write things, for example. Meyerson wanted to set up a group of residential and non-residential colleges, sort of modeled on what they have at like the Harvard houses. Harvard houses, they're residential, but each of them in those days had a theme. Mm-hmm. Adam's house, where I was the one for people in the arts, another was the jocks, another was for the engineers. But I mean, and the activities of the house focused on things like that. So he wanted 10 residential, 10 non-residential. The residential thing never happened. The non-residential did. Well, Warren and I wrote the first plan for that. And so one of the things about Warren is an assignment like that, it's a big deal in the university. He was totally comfortable having as silent co-author an assistant professor in English department because he felt I had something to contribute to it. One time he had a meeting and he wanted to do a report, and he asked me if I could come over. It was about 9:00. I went over and we worked on it for 2 or 3 hours, and he was really tired. So I said, I'll finish it. I'll leave it in the kitchen. So he went to bed, and his study was over a 3-car garage behind the house. And so I finished it, and I went in the kitchen, I taped it to the refrigerator, and I went home. So it was that kind of relationship. Mm. And he introduced me to a lot of stuff I otherwise would not have known. I mean, he would say, "You've got to read this," or "Do you know about this?" And so, also, at that point in time, he was a lot older than I was. Was he 11 years older than I was? What year was born?
His 100th birthday is in 2025. So what was he? He was 1925. He was born.
Okay, I'm born in 36. So he's 11 years older than I was. But when you're 30, 11 years is a big deal. Now it is negligible at this end. I mean, at a certain point in our relationship, we became grown-ups together rather than, but the difference was enough that he fought in World War II. Mm-hmm. I was a kid in World War II. Mm-hmm.
I know that informed a lot of his work and his study. I read something that he said when he came to the University of Cincinnati, as president, he wanted to create an institution that was modeled off of all that we learned about the social sciences after World War II, which I thought was just an interesting. I've reflected sometimes on how the war must have influenced his thinking on leadership and dynamics and culture.
I'll tell you two things about that. One time, this is after he was in Santa Monica.
Okay.
I said, "What do you remember most about the war?" Because he'd been in the Battle of the Bulge. Battle of the Bulge was it was in the winter. The Germans and the Allies were basically stalemated for several months, shelling each other, mortaring each other, but gaining no ground for a long time. And a lot of people died in it, and it was just horrible in every way you can imagine. And I said, "What do you remember about the war?" He said, "The odor of burning flesh." He said, "I sometimes still smell it."
Wow.
Now, this is in Santa Monica. This is how many years later? So he had one story he told. It was one of his representative anecdotes. And he told it free. I heard him tell it a number of times. Warren was either the youngest or one of the youngest second lieutenants in World War II. He was just a kid when he became a lieutenant. And one time, he said to his captain, he said, "Everything is so fucked up. Our supplies are fucked up. Everything is fucked up. I don't understand why they're winning." And he said the captain spat out, and he named whatever kind of tobacco the guy was chewing, and he would do this physically. And he said, "Kid, they got an army too." Well, he told it as a World War II story, but that's a great organizational principle to understand. If you're trying to understand why things get fucked up, it is one of the characteristics of complex organization is things get fucked up. And if you expect perfection, order, and neatness, you're in the wrong profession. One night in Buffalo, my wife and I were having dinner at a restaurant, and I heard over my shoulder a man telling the people at his table the story I just told you. So when they got up, I said, I beckoned him over, and I said, "Did you read that in one of Warren Bennis's books?" He said, "No, I heard him say it. I heard him say it." So that was an important story for him.
That's powerful. So tell me about your days and time at Buffalo together. I understand that this was a tumultuous time.
Yes.
There are some photos, I believe, that Kate Bennis had shared that you took a while ago. Some really great shots of Warren smoking a cigarette, and then I think there were some broken window panes. I saw these photos. This was a couple of years ago. You would have sent them. So I'm just curious to know more about. And then there's some story about the two of you on the radio together.
Yeah, I'll tell you that. Well, 67, fall of 67, that is the year that Vietnam anti-war protests are really cranking up. October 67, October 21st, 1967 is the big March on the Mall, the first really huge anti-war demonstration in DC. And protests, demonstrations at the university started happening, and they cranked up. And there was some violence on campus and some students one night got the idea that one professor was doing secret underwater research for the Navy, teaching frogmen how to breathe without emitting bubbles, so they could. It was something out of a dope crazed dream. It was that this guy was studying pulmonary stress. That's what he was a physician. He was studying lungs. They went in and destroyed his lab. But also, a lot of students were avoiding the draft, and some were getting arrested. Some were going to Canada. Mm-hmm. Some of us faculty made protests by teaching our classes in the hallways, not in the classroom. Silly shit. But I mean, but the air was full of it. One night, I'm having dinner at Warren's house, and his house was separated from the campus by a golf course. And I don't know how wide that part of the golf course was, but a few hundred yards away. And it was Warren, Clury, and me. And all of a sudden, we're all doing this. And I looked up and I said, Warren, that's fucking tear gas. I'd been tear gassed before, so I knew what it was. And he said, yeah. I said, it's got to be coming from the campus. So we got in Warren's car and we went over to the student union. At that point, there were a lot of police on campus. Police were occupying the campus. There were 100, I think there were either 100 or 400 Buffalo policemen occupying the campus at one point. We see the...
What was that number again?
It was 100 or 400. I can check and find out. It was... a vice president had panicked and had called on the police department to control the students. And I'll send you pictures of cops. I'll send you pictures if you'd like to see them. There were cops all over the place. It was crazy. And so we go to the student union, and as we go into the student union, there are 4 glass panels. 2 of them are doors, 2 of them are panels, and there's glass above it. And the glass above it, I see 9 bullet holes. That's a 12-gauge shotgun. Somebody had fired a 12-gauge shotgun at that door because they helped those 9 pellets. Mm. So we go inside, and there's tear gas in the building. We felt that. So we go to this student radio station, WBFO, and BFO had its own air conditioning system. So you could breathe there. And what the cops had done was they'd fired tear gas not only into the building, but into the stairwells. So people coming down from the second floor or coming up from the basement had to go through it. I mean, it was really malicious. I'll come back to that part of it. So Warren and I, we go into one of the broadcasting rooms, and it's in the, let me see, it's in the north, it was in the northwest corner of the building. And so we could see north and we could see west. We could see cops on the west. Across the street from us is a women's dormitory. And we're listening on the radio to a city station. The police commissioner, a guy whose name I think was Frank Felicetta, is saying, somebody has said that we are firing tear gas. Our men do not have tear gas launchers. Well, he was full of shit, because what a tear gas launcher was in those days was simply a bracket that fit on the end of a 12-gauge shotgun. You put the tear gas canister in it, you shot it, and it started going as soon as it came out of the shotgun. And so it hit wherever it landed, already steaming. And so Warren and I are watching cops shooting
war
these.
Zone.
Huh?
Like a war zone.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. So we are watching these cops shooting into the windows of the women's dormitory. I mean, as I said, it was totally malicious stuff. So one of the producers there, by the way, All Things Considered started at that station. NPR is All Things Considered, so it was a very active news station. And one of the guys said, "Well, do you want to go in the air and talk about it?" So Warren said, "Yeah." So they put us on the air and we described what we were seeing and just said, "Here's what you're doing now. Here's what you're doing now." And then after a while, we went back to Warren's house and we had a drink. But I didn't see any other university administrators around here that night.
Do you have that? Do you have that audio?
No.
Wow.
You know,
But you have the memory.
yes, I do. And I didn't have a camera with me either. And unfortunately, these didn't exist. So otherwise, I'd have both. Uh,
Right.
but I have pictures I took from the window,
Yeah.
and you can see the clouds of gas. So something else about the context. There was a huge amount of anti-Semitic feeling in Buffalo towards the university at that time. Some people referred to it as Jew-B because until 1963, the University of Buffalo had been a city college, private. It was a city college, but privately. It had its own board and its own financing.
Mhm.
And it became part of SUNY in 63, or maybe even 62. And then Meyerson came in about that time and started bringing in a huge number of faculty, Jews like Warren and me. And a lot of students came from New York City. Before that, it had been, Buffalo's a very Catholic town. So it was where a lot of Catholic kids who didn't go to the Catholic college went.
Okay.
Because it was cheaper. And once it became state, college was a lot cheaper then than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people felt, I got Jewish hate mail while this was going on. Warren got Jewish hate mail. And I think one of the reasons Warren didn't get made president of UB was because he was a Jew. I mean, somebody told me, I didn't hear it directly, that one of the board members had said, after Meyerson, there's no way we're going to appoint another Jew president of UB. Because at the time Warren became president of Cincinnati, turmoil was still going on in places. And, so it was a very tumultuous time in American life.
Meyerson left before Warren.
Yeah.
Warren described I think it was in Still Surprised, he described the time in Buffalo as sort of a dream of like a utopia. I think when he was talking about the administration, there was a story he shared about somebody hanging a superhero cape on a coat hook in his office. My understanding of the time in Buffalo was that there was this grand vision that didn't happen.
I thought this is what it's supposed to be like in college life. Mm-hmm. So for years afterward, I was terribly disappointed that, where did it go? And I realized I was nostalgic for something that never existed. I mean, it did exist, but not for very long. And certainly it was built on sand. It was nothing permanent, nothing universal. It was part of the time that was gone. Warren wore a cape often then. Warren was, he would do that. So that's what the superhero thing was a riff on, that somebody was making a gag about his cape. He
would wear capes around campus.
It was a beautiful wool cape. I mean, a European thing. I may even have had a hood. Yeah.
What else do you remember from Warren at Buffalo? Was he writing at that time? I don't know that he.
I don't know. I remember one thing about writing. I'll get to in a moment. All this turmoil was going on, and this is something I think goes to the kind of person Warren was. Excuse me. He said students should make something of this more than running around. So we did a freshman seminar called the University Experience, where we had the president of the student council, the head of the Black Students Union, the head of the Student Socialist Organization. There were about 12 kids in this. Met every week for a semester at Warren's house. And our subject is what was going on, literally what happened this week. And basically, we debriefed the week. I don't remember if something came up that was relevant, we'd all read it. And otherwise, we just talk about it and try to put it in something other than rhetorical perspective, because everybody was making speeches in those days. And it was a great class. And about 10 years ago, maybe less, somebody at the university president's office had the idea of, let's do freshman seminars. They're a great idea. Yeah, I didn't say anything, but Warren had that idea in 1968. But that's like that faculty group I told you about,
right?
Where he, and he loved it because then he had those 3 jobs,
right?
And the kids loved it because here they are talking to a guy who runs the joint. It's very hard to demonize somebody who runs a joint when you're drinking.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. A lot of people that we've talked to, especially in Cincinnati, who were younger when he was in leadership there, said, he brought us into his process. He brought us into budget meetings. He had an indoor policy. He was big on mentorship and investing in younger folks.
Yeah.
It sounds like that was the case at Buffalo.
Yeah, it was
as well.
So he was a good call. Now, when he was looking for jobs, he was very hurt because he found out Martin had been cool. One place had asked Martin about Warren as candidate when he was looking for president jobs, and he found out Warren he had not recommended him, and he felt betrayed for many years. A few years before Martin died, someone in Buffalo invited my wife Diane and me to have dinner with him. Oh, the guy who invited us had been the former chancellor of the university system, and he invited us to have dinner with Martin. And Martin said one thing he'd always felt sad about was that Warren and he had broken apart, and he didn't understand why it happened. So I told him, and he said, that's not what I wrote. He said, I just thought that would be a lousy job for Warren. It's not that I didn't think he'd be a bad president. He said, it would have been a terrible place for him. So I told Warren, and Warren called him, and they got back together again, and they saw each other a few times before Martin died, which, had it not been for that dinner, would not have happened. And that misunderstanding was there for a long time. The last year before Martin left, he had a grant from some academy to write a book about college turmoil or something. I don't think the book was ever done. And he had an office, I think in Sisters Hospital, which is about 2 miles south of the campus. It was away from the campus. And he appointed a guy named Peter Regan, who was a physician, acting president. So Peter bore the brunt of the political heat that last year of Martin's presidency. And then Martin got made president of Penn. And I think he may have been the first Jewish president of an Ivy League university. And Peter got so creamed. I mean, he could have been the best president in the world. It wouldn't have mattered that year because the steamroller was just going in all directions. Students were trusting no one. The city was pissed off at everyone. And so they appointed a very conservative engineer as president, a guy named Bob Ketter. And then that's when the university became like all other universities. Yeah.
There was an article that you mentioned so I'm thinking about the time period in which we've been floating around.
Yeah.
1964, he would have wrote Democracy is Inevitable with Phil Slater. And I know you mentioned this in in the email that you had wanted to update that.
He updated it at one point, as I recall. The thing he did with Phil was democracy is inevitable, and then he may have revised it as is democracy inevitable. And the last few times I saw him, we were talking about doing a new version of it, bringing it into the present. But we unfortunately, it's one of the things I regret. We just never got around to doing it.
What would you you said that of all your late friends, he would be one of whom you would like to have a conversation with about the state of the world now. I'm curious, I think that with this project and some of the work around his legacy, it's been framed as building on his legacy, and trying to figure out how to do that. So I wonder what would you talk to him about today, and why are you captivated by it? What relevance is what does the world need from his work now?
Well, preface that I have conversations with Warren all the time now. I love it. I'm the only one who hears them, but
great.
When you get to be my age, you have certain friends in your head who are kind of reference points for you, and what would he or she have to say about this? What would we be talking about? Where are we together right now? For example, there was a resignation in Great Britain yesterday, the shortest prime minister in British history, 6 weeks. We would have been on the phone about that in a hot second. Why did she resign? Resignation was a big thing for him because of what happened at Buffalo. At Buffalo, he resigned one of his vice presidencies. He didn't resign the other. And we had some arguments about the nature of resignation, and the reason he didn't resign the other was he wanted to still have some influence on what happened, which was reasonable. But as a public statement, nobody understood that, I think, and which is why he wrote about it in one of his books, because it was something he felt had been misunderstood. When is it right to resign? When is it right to walk away? When is it right to stay in your position to make them fire you? Fuck you, fire me. I'm not going to quit. Which we saw happened in the Trump administration. There were some people who wouldn't quit. They made him fire them. Warren and I certainly would have been on the phone about that. And I remember he said to me one time that, I forget what he'd read, that one of the most important forces for democratization in non-democratic countries is increasing the literacy of women. And we would certainly be having conversations about that, about places where education and options for women to engage in levels of education at all levels are restricted, are being pulled back. What the Taliban is up to now. Yeah. This is all kinds of stuff that would have fascinated Warren, and about which he would have more sensible things to say than anybody I know. So we were out of touch for several years. And then in the early 90s, I was working in Hollywood for Dustin Hoffman. And he wrote me about that time. And we got together one morning for coffee. We talked for about 4 hours. And it was like we picked up the conversation where we'd left it in the last time I'd seen him some years earlier. And we remained pretty close for the rest of his life. And he was one of my three closest friends.
Wow.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways the closest, because we talked about everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see the two of you having done a book together or something on American culture, or it just seems like some of the things that you've said that you've studied. I could see the intersection of your interests.
Well, what I did now, um, again, back to my iPhone, I could see us doing a book together of just turning the iPhone on to record every time we got together and giving it to a secretary.
Oh, sure.
Uh, so, so I miss them.
Did you the time that I'm curious how what was it like to read? Did you read much of his work as he began to publish quite a bit?
I, I did early on, and then didn't in the middle, and then I caught up later after we started hanging out again.
Mhm.
So, leadership is not my field. I am not an organizational person. I've never been chair of anything. Well, I guess I have, but just I was faking it. But it was, well, a university a few years ago gave a composer friend of mine and me $1 million to give away to artists. So we set up a thing so we were chairs of that. It's been things like that, but I've never administered anything. So that's not my world. But I was interested. I mean, I learned a lot about the fact of leadership, about how people run things, about doing things from him. I've done a lot of work in prisons. That's where a lot of my most academic and some of my best known stuff has been. And a lot of what I understand about the way prisons function and work, I drew from conversations with Warren about bureaucracy. And we talked about the way bureaucracy works. And I remember a guy who was the head of the Texas prison system, a guy named George Beto, once asked me, where did you learn so much about organizations?
Mhm.
Well, about prisons. Well, I hadn't learned much about prisons, but I knew a lot about organizations.
Mm.
And it's from those conversations, I think. And it's not that Warren would give me lectures on organizations, but we talk about something, and he saw things often in organizational terms.
Mm.
How can you fix something? If something is holding things up, how do you figure out what's the place in the system that will fix that? It's not just shooting Fred. It's got to be. It's more complex than that. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of thinking he introduced me to that I don't think I would have encountered otherwise.
Yeah, there was a neat story. I forget which book he put it in, but I hear a lot of stories about him, like just getting lunch or having meals with friends. I know you said more than anything that's who he was to you, and I really appreciated that. And I think he was having lunch with the president of USC when he was there, Steve Sample.
Steve had been president of UB before that.
Oh, no kidding.
So I knew Steve from here.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay, that's an amazing connection. Yeah, Steve, I think Warren had asked him to read his memoir and give him his feedback before he published it. And Steve said to Warren, he said, "Warren, this isn't a book about leadership. This is a love story. This is a love story to society, to our culture, to our world." And I like that. I kind of like that way of framing his work, because I feel like to put, he's regarded as a leadership pioneer, I think, in a lot of circles, but I think he cared a lot about, it seems, from our conversation today and others that I've talked to, just he cared about the state of affairs. He cared about
Oh, he cared about yeah.
I think that it seems like that's what motivated his work was like this panel I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation today, that we were doing in DC with Kate Bennis, his daughter. We actually polled the audience, and there was a woman in the audience who had studied Warren, and she said, I think his work at the end of the day, two words that describe him: humanity and humility. And I don't know if that resonates with you, but I like that.
And flair.
And flair.
Warren had a lot of flair.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he was a presence.
Yeah.
He wasn't a big guy, but he was always in the room.
Okay.
About Steve Sample, Steve did a book on leadership. Where do you think that came from? Steve and Warren taught a class for a couple of years at USC on leadership. And I was there for one or two of them. And what they did was each week they would invite somebody else in. And because of their connections, they could get heavies to come in. And one week I was there, it was either the mayor or the DA of LA County was their guest. And they would chat about Steve and Warren would chat about this person and his work. They'd ask him a few questions. And then they'd open it up to the kids, to the room. And so, over 13 weeks or however long the semester was, these students were exposed to some people who were in positions of real leadership, talking about current situations that they often knew about because they just read about it in the newspaper that morning, with Warren and Steve pushing it along. Steve was a very reserved guy, and Warren was very outgoing. So in a way, they were a real good pair to moderate, because they could approach the guests in different ways. So I've seen comments from students in our class saying it was the best class they ever had.
Did you participate in the class?
No, I wasn't a guest. I was just a visitor in it.
Oh, you just observed. That's cool.
Well, no, Warren said, come on down, come with me to class. So I went.
Oh, that's neat. That's neat.
And again, it's another one where Warren, it's like that freshman seminar. These were students. I don't know if they were business school students or if it was an open class to the university. That thing, but here they are with the president of the university. And Warren, who at that point is extremely well known in the corporate world, leading the class, and they would bring in people from the industry, Hollywood people. So it was really cool.
Yeah,
that's another thing that could have been just transcribed and could have been
the class.
A fascinating book.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think most people don't know about? What do you think what can't you read about Warren?
I don't understand that question.
Like what can you not get about Warren from reading his books or reading like a bio on him?
Just what a Hamish guy he was, what a person he was. He was just he's a guy.
Yeah.
He's a guy, and a very good guy. But Warren was somebody you could hang out with, and it wasn't bullshit hanging out. It wasn't star fucking. It was Warren hung out he'd hang out with a student. He'd hang out with the president of. I remember one time I was at his house, and his car had broken down, and it was really pissed off. And he got a call from somebody, president of a large corporation, wanting him to come up to where this guy was. I'm not going to tell you who it was. Uh, and it was going to take 2 or 3 days. And Warren just didn't want to do it because you get to a certain point in your life, 2 or 3 days, it's, fuck you. I'm only going to do it if I want to do it.
Yeah.
And so Warren, in frustration, said, look, my car just broke down. If you buy me a BMW, I'll come up. The guy said, done. He bought him a BMW. Warren went up. I got a BMW. It was but that's it, and people wanted to talk to him and hang. Well, all the guy wanted, he wanted some advice from Warren, but he wanted to hang out with him doing it. He didn't just want a telephone call. He wanted to hang out. Well, it was fun. He was fun to hang out with. And about lunches, we used to go to a place he loved called the Breakers in LA. And there was an upstairs dining room, which was quite fancy. And there was one that was downstairs, and it was half above ground and half below ground. And by that, I mean, where you sat, and it was right on the jogging, right adjacent to the jogging path. And so you'd sit there and you would see all these beautiful doctor-made bodies going, LA bodies going, joggers going by, and we went there a number of times, and he had 3 or 4 places he loved to go and he always picked up the tab. And when I was working for Dustin, I figured, well, Dustin's paying for me. I can pick it up. So he was that way too. He was a very generous guy.
Yeah, that's a word I've heard a number of times around his life.
Yeah,
His generosity.
I mean, generosity with money, generosity more with time. More importantly, with time.
Yeah, I wish Bruce that I could listen to a recording of one of your conversations.
So do I.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we didn't. It didn't occur to us.
Right. So I have a final question for you. So you are 86 years old, and you are still. It sounds like you are. I think that's something from Warren's work that I really respected was just this. I think he used the word. I'm not going to pronounce it right, but Nyatny, sort of the maintaining of youth-like qualities in old age. And, he talked a lot about lifelong learning and the crucible. And he said aging for himself was a crucible, one of the more difficult things that he went through. But just what keeps you, do you find that you are able to, you seem like somebody that's still learning.
I am. I have. I had 3 books come out this year.
No kidding.
Two are reprints, but one is a revised and much expanded reprint. That's a book called "The Story Is True," about narrative. Originally published, I think, in 2005. Another is a book my wife and I did with Men Waiting to Be Executed that originally came out in 1980 that we added new material to. And the third is a totally new book called Ways of the Hand, which is 113 photographs and about 90 stories. Our editor was here for dinner 2 nights ago, and we're doing another book that he wants me to do, which I've been working on the last day. And I told you that I had these 2 plays based on my work. So stuff like that keeps me going. I mean, it keeps me.
What were the plays?
I don't play golf. I mean.
What were the plays, Bruce? What were those?
The first one was called The B-Side, a record album interpretation, and it was based on an album that was released by Elektra in 1965 called Negro Folklore from Texas State Prisons. And it was material I recorded in 1964, which is an important year in American history because that's the year of the big voter registration drive in the South It's the summer Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman were murdered in Mississippi by the Klan. It was a year of real political turmoil that predated the anti-war turmoil of 3 years later. And a lot of the same people would be involved, and a lot of the techniques developed during the civil rights era during that time would be used in the anti-war thing. So that's when this was. And so this was done by a group called the Worcester Group, which is an experimental theater group in New York. New York Times and Washington Post called it one of the 10 best plays of the year.
Wow.
And the new one, which just had a 3-week trial run, it had its main run next fall, is based on a book and album of mine called Get Your Ass in the Water and Swim Like Me. And this is a collection of African-American street poems, a lot of them misogynistic, violent, nasty about drugs, some of them homiletic. It's a great range of stuff, but it's a genre whites know nothing about. And so it just, as I said, finished a 3-week run. They're going to tune it, and then it'll come out. So, and that has been great fun, because working with that group is like what Buffalo was when I came here, because they are in a state of constant creation. They're constantly figuring things out, constantly saying, let's give it a try. You hear very few people in the university these days say, well, let's give it a try. And when Warren and I came here, it was that kind of intellectual environment, and it was very heady stuff.
Like a real curiosity and willingness to create. Yeah, that's.
One time Warren said, why don't you come to the beach with us? I said, okay, what beach? Well, the beach was in Nassau, and it was a house I later learned was owned by Clory's father. I thought he was renting it. It had belonged to Charlie Chaplin. And the other 2 couples there were Phil Slater, Phil and his wife and his kids, and a composer-conductor named Lucas Foss. Lucas is an important guy in the modern music world. In Buffalo, Lucas was conductor of the Buffalo Philharmonic. He ran a series of new music things at the Albright Knox Art Gallery, and he ran the music composition program at the university. So he tied those 3 cultural institutions together. So we were there for a week, and then Warren Clory hosting it at this magnificent place. I mean, it's part of the island that is just one house wide. On one side is the Paradise Island. One side is the channel to the Big Island, and the other side is the sea. So it was totally private. There were enough kids they could all be put in a bunkhouse. They had somebody to take care of them, and we would just talk, drink, go off and write things during the day, and hang out. And
great time.
But that's the kind of thing Warren would do.
Yeah.
I mean, here I am telling you about it 50 years later. I mean, it still resides in my memory. There were a lot of things that happened in those years that have long ago vaporized.
Yeah, so it's not like it was just like, okay, I'm going to go lock myself in a room and write and wait for the ideas to come. It was like invite people to be together.
Yeah.
We're going to have a good time, and we're going to talk, and then we'll go write about it.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I'm amazed. 3 books this year, 2 plays in the last 5 years for you. It's amazing. And as you think about, we'll close with this one. Bruce.
Okay.
So again, back at the conference, DC, this past week, one of Warren's colleagues at Harvard, who you, I'm sure, probably know, David Gergen.
I was at a party at David's house for Warren.
Were you really?
Yeah. I call him David. I met him only that one time. But the Kennedy Center, as you probably know, had a huge celebration for Warren. And Gergen hosted a cocktail party. And so uh, there are a number of Warren's old friends were there, including Frederick Wiseman, documentary filmmaker, who's a friend of mine, introduced by the same guy who introduced me to Warren. And so it was a great party. So yeah, I know.
That's amazing. He was at the conference in DC with Kate, and he was talking about this new book that he came out called Hearts Touched by Fire, and it references Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. Memorial Day speech, and the whole premise of the book, and Warren's fingerprints are all over the book, but the whole premise of the book is just about like the next generation. And Warren came out with an article that the book made me think of. So the article Warren came out with was towards the end of his life, and it was the next greatest generation is on its way. And he was kind of making the argument that this was like 2009, I think 2009, 2010. But he was just saying that kind of the crucibles, to use his language, of the challenges of things like the, corporate scandals of the 2000s and the financial crisis. As we look at like the last 2 decades, the challenges of those times will have shaped this next generation. And Gergen in his book was kind of calling for the next generation to kind of step up. And I think I had asked you about this in the emails, just about the future. And, I know you said it wasn't looking good, but I just wonder, in the spirit of Warren, what about this future? What are you, help me look ahead.
I can't. I wish I could. I am in terror of this election. If the Republicans win the House, we're fucked. What is happening to voter registration across the country harks back to Reconstruction. The court is in a terrible place. But things like this had happened before. It's not like we're here for the first time. And things have gotten out of it. Unfortunately, I won't be, I'm not going to be here that long. I want to be here to see us start pulling out. I would like to see the curve going back upward, and I hope I am. I have grandchildren. I worry for them. So I can't make optimistic projections. Over the course of time, Martin Luther King's, the trend is towards justice. But this week, somebody's hanged who shouldn't have been, or somebody starved to death who could have been fed, or somebody's getting away with a crime who should not have, and other people are suffering. So I tend to look at micro. I don't tend to look at macro. So and in that regard, Warren and I were different, I think. I don't make big predictions.
But I feel like he would probably say both are important, like both perspectives.
Yeah.
Micro and
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. We. If I had, you're getting me to a kind of statement I don't usually make. We live in the micro, but we work for the macro. I write things, I publish things for people who aren't born yet. I just recently sent 100 boxes of things to the Library of Congress. That's where my stuff is. And the reason it went there is because there's just a lot of raw material there that I'll never have time to use, I'll never use, but somebody else will, that I've saved, stuff from the civil rights era, stuff from the prison era, stuff I've recorded, people, correspondence with Warren, correspondence with people like that people will make use of. So doing that obviously shows that I have some optimism that a future is going to exist, because otherwise I wouldn't spend a little time doing this shit work to get that stuff together. I would have said, fuck it, throw it.
I had a chance to meet one of Warren's colleagues in Cincinnati who lives in Cleveland, where I'm based, who you probably know as well, Otis Moss Senior, Otis Moss Jr. But he was a colleague of Martin Luther King's and was on the board in Cincinnati when Warren was at UC. So it was really neat. We got to go to his house. He lives about 15 minutes from where I work now, and we sat in his house on his couch and handed him some photos of Warren, and he showed us some photos of him with Martin Luther King, and it was
how cool!
It was really, really amazing. But I like we work in the micro for the macro. That's a nugget. That's a nugget from today.
I think I wouldn't have thought of it without this conversation. So it's yours.
Yeah. No. Well, so in your micro work for the macro, what do you think? Warren talked about context. You just have me really curious, Bruce. Warren talked about context, and leaders challenge the context. They disrupt the status quo. What have you challenged? What have you challenged, or in your years, in your micro work?
Just about everything that moves.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I've challenged every president of this university. I've challenged every United States president we've had. I've published a lot of political articles in places like Counterbunch, The Nation, New Republic. I've challenged the prison system. I've challenged anti-voter registrations. I've done a lot of political stuff over the years. And in fact, one of the things that we would regularly talk about, I'd come back from a prison trip, or I'd come back from a political demonstration, like that one in Washington I told you about on October 21st, 1967. And, Warren and I would talk about it. And then I go home and I wrote about it. The article I wrote about it was in Atlantic Monthly, January, a few months later. So I've done hundreds of articles and 40 books. So I've gone after a lot of things. I've pursued a lot of demons, real and unreal, and sometimes, sometimes it had some effect, sometimes not. But
yeah. And all in service to, I mean, is that all in service to democracy? Is that something that comes from your faith, your Jewish faith? Is that what is that?
It was fun.
Yeah,
it was interesting.
That's great. I love that answer. That's awesome.
It was fun doing it.
That is great. Wow, we might have to end there.
Okay.
That's brilliant.
Well, my friend Robert Creeley, the poet, Bob, one of his poems begins, "If it's not fun, why do it?" I wouldn't still be cranking out books. It wasn't fun.
Yeah, right.